Good morning, my name's Ray Stinson, and I recently published, or self-published, this book, Team Tommy. So I'll talk a little bit about my very early beginnings in authorship, which were, well, let me say non-existent. But when I was younger, and this is much younger, in my early 20s, I never had a television, so I read a lot. And I fancied living in a garret. So I wrote this book eventually, and it was called Azazel, A-Z-A-Z-E-L. It's a Jewish name for the devil. So I sent this away, a copy. You know, I never heard from the publisher, which I thought, well, okay. Now I dragged this manuscript around with me for over 40 years. Remember, it's just typewritten, going yellow, fading. But one day this was going to make my fortune. So when I finally retired, I thought, well, I'll have a look at this, clean it up a bit, put it on the computer, send the file away. It was rubbish. It was awful. It was a young man's fantasies more than anything else. So anyway, I've always worked. So you don't get a lot of time, I suppose, but I did write another book in my 40s. I used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was called The Power of Negative Thinking. Now I got fed up with these seminars when overseas people, mainly from America, was telling us all we got to think positive and the world would be wonderful. So I wrote this book, but I never did anything with it, and it obviously hasn't gone anywhere, and probably will never go anywhere. So last year, I was with U3A. I met up with Anne Moffat, who I think people in the library know Anne pretty well, and she was wonderful, and she's a great woman. But I was lucky to win 2 short story competitions in Queensland, U3A Queensland, which was really quite encouraging. But by this time, I was a long way along with Team Tommy. Now, where does Team Tommy come from? Okay, well, I was living in Port Douglas, and we used to go and walk around the mangroves area, around near the marina, and I saw in the mangroves a yellow vest. It could have been a Visi, or it could have been a life vest. Now, if you've ever, well, you wouldn't go into mangroves by choice, and it's impassable, and it's mud, and it's mosquitoes, and it's bitey things and crabs and the old crocodile. But this is 30 meters in there, and it's way above the waterline, so how did it get there? So that prompted me to start basically Team Tommy. Now, Team Tommy, or Tommy, when he was born, he had awful problems, and I did when I was a child, because I couldn't speak until I was about 4 or 5. So Tommy had that genetic makeup, you might say. So the book is not in chronological order. It starts in Port Douglas, and it basically starts with Tommy's dad, Harry, trying to disappear. Now, there was a period just before that mangrove incident that a yachty disappeared. Now, he could swim, and he fell in the water near the boat club. And what happened to him, nobody knows. Now, I'm sure that if he got taken by a crocodile, they would try and suppress the news, because nobody wants to go to places where crocodiles eat you. You know, it's not a popular thing to do, you know. So I thought, well, this is where Tommy's dad has to disappear. This is because of something that he's done. But we go back to Melbourne, and little Tommy is struggling. He can't sleep. He doesn't eat properly. So they go to the doctor. Now in Victoria, you have a little green book, and if you're a mother, you keep your little green book page by page. And his mother, Jean, was very religious, but she had to go to the doctor. Doctor said, no, that's all part of growing up, not a problem. Still the same problem. She went to the doctor 8 times, and the doctor was always saying, no, not a problem. You know, this doctor didn't like children, but she didn't know that. Tommy's mother didn't know that. So it was misdiagnosis. Eventually they got to the pediatrician, and he had meningitis. Now, he'd been having seizures. And if you've ever seen a child have a seizure, it's horrible. You can't touch them. You can't hug them, you can't do anything. Now, Tommy was having seizures, something to do with the meningitis, but he got over that. But he never improved his speech, and he really wasn't going forward. A few months later, some lumps appeared, and it was neuroblastoma. Now, neuroblastoma is a rare childhood cancerous disease, and this was stage 4, which is virtually a death sentence. So, he's 3 years of age, still can't speak, has been diagnosed. Now, you don't want to watch your child die. That shouldn't work. So, what happens is that you have to try and find a way. There was no way in Australia that there was a cure. It was possible we could get out of it, but very, very unlikely. So the challenge was to find somewhere in the world where they could possibly have a cure. Good old Google came into play, and Jean, Tommy's mother, found a clinic in Sweden, in a place called Alingas, A-L-I-N-G-A-S. Beautiful place. It doesn't have the clinic, but a nice place to go to. But of course it's on the other side of the world, and it's not cheap, and it's not cheap to go there. So this is when Team Tommy came into being. Tommy's mother had a sister called Mandy, and they were twins. And of course his father, Harry, said, "We will do this. Leave it to me." Now, Harry was working in a large finance company in the payroll office. Now, payroll people aren't, well, let me say they're sort of bottom of the ladder. They're bottom dwellers. But they work with very complex systems, which most of them only understand a very small part of. The technical parts of payroll have become so technical that hardly anybody knows what's going on, which opens the door for these magic people called ghosts. Now, many, many payroll systems throughout the world, throughout this country, have what they call ghosts, and these are people that don't exist. And these are people that get paid, and subsequently. Now, there was a woman in an organization not that long ago who managed to rip off $20 million in 2 years. But she spent it while she went along, including buying shares for the company. But she could have disappeared, but you know, she was going nowhere. But it's open to, it's always been the same. It's been the same long before systems. It was on the waterfront there, I recall that there was a number of ghosts used to be put on the payroll. So it happened. So how do we get to this clinic? Well, if you're going to, let me say, remove some money from this very large and greedy finance company, you can't just take a small amount, you might as well take a large amount, because if they were going to do it, they had to get out of Australia and they wouldn't be able to come back, because somewhere along the line somebody would find out. And Harry knew this, and he worked 7 days a week. He had to keep his finger on the pulse all the time. There's a great character in this organisation, and it's based on one in Australia, but I won't mention the name, of course. But this character is called the Bilby. Now, the Bilby is an internal auditor. Now, most people don't like auditors, and subsequently auditors don't like other people. So everybody hated the Bilby in this organisation, but they had to work with him because he would get you. If you said you didn't like him or you didn't respect him, he basically was number 2 in the company. He just liked it. He liked to sneak up on people. He liked to find out things. He liked to see their heads on the chopping block. He liked to see them walk out of the company devastated with nowhere to go. That was his pleasure. That was his enjoyment. He had a trophy wife who spent his money for him. That was it. So Tommy ends up, of course, he has to go to the clinic first to see if they could do anything. They said, yes, but we can't fit you in for 6 to 8 months. Well, that gave Harry time to, let me say, misappropriate a few funds. He ended up taking a few million, and they get out into Sweden. After Sweden, it's about an eight-month course. Meanwhile, Tommy discovers trains, but that's another story. And he becomes addicted to steam locomotives. But eventually they go and they had to find somewhere where they could have a business away from Australia and basically remain hidden. Now, Harry was anxiety plus, and he could never get over the fact that somebody might one day find out. He knew this was a good cause. He knew the company would almost wipe off the money. They didn't care. They used to pay bonuses of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and this does happen. But he was always fearful, and he started to go down. He went to Mexico before Jean and Tommy went there because him and Mandy had to set up a business. And so basically, Tommy's dad, Harry, went downhill, and he was always worried, and he had to go under a psychiatrist over there. But I won't go much more about Tommy, but subsequently they did get to Mexico. But I wrote this book, and I still cry. See? Okay. 4 times I edited this book. So remember to take your tissues. Now you can wipe this bit out. Yeah, but it was a great challenge, and I self-published. I self-published basically because probably I didn't know where else to go. Now, self-publishing is a challenge in itself. What will go wrong? I can guarantee you will go wrong. This book is available through Amazon Books, and they were very good because I'm sort of half a Luddite, so you know I know how to do, well, let me say, stuff things up quite easily, you know. So I managed to get the book out, and it's now on Amazon Books. But there's a few notes, if you don't mind me referring to my notes. Okay, there's something about self-publishing. Now, they say you should send it to an editor. Fine, great, but you've got to have the money to do that. And if you don't know if you're going to have a market, you may only sell 20 books, you don't know. You're probably paying $2,000 for an editor. So you can access a grammar program on Word and on Apple Mac, probably not as good as an editor. You have to read it, possibly give it to somebody who's got a bit of time to read it for you as well, to put their mark on it. The first published Tommy was only 40 books, and they send you author copies, and yes, there were mistakes, but the people that read those books said, well, okay, we saw them, but it didn't matter. So, okay, if you miss a full stop, or you know, you make simple errors like that, really it's the book that matters. So don't stress too much over grammar. If you've ever read Tim Winton, he never uses inverted commas for language. It just goes straight through, and you never know. You never notice it. So I personally think grammar is, let me say, over-popularized, but some people insist on having great grammar. I now have a book which I published last week called Elections Still, and it's very apt for this time of the year, and some of the characters in there, of course, they don't go by their original names, and it's a little bit of a spoof and a little bit of what could happen if a major third party came in with limitless resources and the will, and, well, would work outside the boundaries to succeed. But anyway, thanks for your time. Team Tommy's the name of the book. On Amazon, all you got to do is punch in my name, Ray Stinson, on Amazon or Amazon Books. Always remember it's Amazon Australia. Otherwise, you might end up in Timbuktu or somewhere like that. So, all right, thanks for your time.